Are you looking for the best in-depth training for your cyber defense team? Look no further than SANS Blue Team courses. Whether you focus on network or host data, Windows, Linux, or even specialize in open source intelligence, SIEM, SOC, or defensive architecture, the SANS Blue Team curriculum has the course for you. From longtime classics like SEC 503, network intrusion detection, to the newer SEC 530, defensible security architecture and engineering, and SEC 487, open source intelligence gathering. No matter what your specialty, we've got you covered. With an extensive archive of free webcasts on the SANS site and free online demos available for most courses, you can easily check out the SANS Blue Team catalog and see which course is the best fit for you and your team. Check out the constantly growing list of available courses at sansurl.com/blueteamops.
This is the Blueprint Podcast, bringing you the latest in cyber defense and security operations from top Blue Team leaders. Blueprint is brought to you by the SANS Institute and is hosted by SANS certified instructor John Hubbard. And now, here's your host, John Hubbard.
Today on the Blueprint Podcast, we have Josh Brower from Security Onion Solutions. If you've seen Josh speak at any conferences recently, you'll know he's been working on some key contributions to the new version of Security Onion in the form of the new Playbook application. Regardless of whether you use Security Onion or not, I wanted to dive into the design principles and workflow we planned out and coded up for the new open source Playbook app, because I honestly think it's amazing work and there's something to learn from it for everyone on the Blue Team. A lot of SOCs struggle with use case organization, analytic documentation, unit testing, metrics creation, and more. And I think what Josh has done here wraps up solutions to many of those problems into one tightly integrated solution. If you've ever been an analyst staring at an IDS alert and wondering what to do next, or a SOC manager trying to generate metrics on your detection capability in an easy way, this episode is for you. Combining Sigma rules, Attack Navigator, the Hive, and other open source Blue Team favorites, the new Playbook software Josh created was designed to address common SOC problems and much, much more. Stick around to hear the details coming up on this episode of the Blueprint Podcast. All right, welcome everyone to the Blueprint Podcast. Today I have Josh Brower. I had Josh on the podcast today because I'm really interested in his involvement in creating the Playbook functionality for Security Onion. As someone who's always trying to organize analytics and use cases and things like that, Josh came up with a really innovative solution here. And I think he's probably come up with something that might be more efficient than anything I've ever seen before. And I love the way it integrates and everything like that. So I wanted to interview him and pull out some of that very, very useful information on workflow and the deep thinking I'm sure he did to build this application. So welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Thank you so much, John. Great to be here.
So before we get started, can you hear a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are now?
Sure. So I actually started in IT when I was a teenager, probably a lot of you the same, where you fixed your family's computers and things like that. And so very early on, got into IT and spent the first part of my career in operations, more from a sysadmin and a network side of things. And then got my first SANS cert back in 2008. And from then on, really focused on security at that point, and spent most of my career in the international nonprofit community, doing information security among that particular community. Then about a year and a half ago, joined Security Onion Solutions, specifically focused on engineering of the platform and training. I've run Security Onion in production for many years in my previous organizations. And so it was just a really natural fit, and it's been a really good year and a half with Security Onion working on the platform itself.
Fantastic. What was it that brought you specifically to want to tackle the problem of playbooks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, well, first of all, let's define this idea of a playbook, right? So a lot of people in the industry will use different ways to define a playbook and playbooks. And for me, I really look at it from the perspective of a detection playbook. We have plays that make up a playbook, and plays are just essentially custom reports or detections that you write, and they make up your detection playbook. And I really got into this because a few years ago, again, at my previous organization, I was working on a particular issue where we had a technology stack that required a high-level service account, domain service account, and I was concerned about monitoring that. And I went to try to write an last alert rule, specifically figure out a way to write a rule for that so we can monitor anytime we see usage of that account outside of where it should be. And I realized that even if I could write this rule and get this alert to generate. The next person who sees the alert is going to have no idea what this means. We just know that this account was accessed on this machine, and there's no context and there's no next steps. Okay, so I've got this. Now what do I do? And that was really the beginning of me trying to figure out a way in my work of how can I write detections in a way that would give context to what I'm trying to do and give the analyst next steps. Because whether the analyst is me 6 months from now because I've slept and I don't remember what I did, or someone else on the team. So that was kind of the original idea, is building up detection plays in Playbook that gives context and next steps. Is that making sense, John?
Yeah, absolutely. That gets to, I think, one of the biggest problems in a lot of security operations centers, especially ones with a lot of kind of retention or turnover problems, is the tribal knowledge thing, right? Yeah. You get new people coming in and they're like, first day on the job, this alert goes off. What do I do? Right. Yep. And so having a documented place for those kind of things, I think, is a fantastic way to eliminate that and standardize, what is expected, and understanding what a rule is, where the data comes from, what false positives might be created, and all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of how I look at playbooks too. So that's why I was really excited when I saw like everything you had in here. I'm like, oh, this is perfect. That's super cool. Walk me through, in terms of the new application for Security Onion, like what is the workflow for someone who is maybe just thought of a brand new idea and is going to turn that into a rule, as opposed to maybe an analyst that is going to be referencing it? How does this interaction happen?
Sure. So Playbook is an application. The backend is just a Redmine and open source, like issue tracking and project management application. And the idea is that a person who has this new idea, let's say a really, really basic good one here is, I want to get alerted anytime there is a RDP connection from an external IP address to one of my internal endpoints, right? So that means that I have maybe an RDP listener, remote desktop protocol listener, publicly accessible. And so I got this great idea. Where do I go? Well, first, I got to figure out where my logs are, right? And so I know, let's say I have Zeek logs that are available for me to alert off of in Security Onion. So I know I've got the logs. Next up is you're going to open up Playbook and you're going to write a Sigma rule for it. Sigma is a language to describe detections. Think of Sigma, just like we have Sierra and Snort alerts for network data. We have Yara for files. We have Sigma for log files. And so you're going to write a Sigma rule that says, anytime I see a Zeek connection record, a Zeek RDP record from an external IP address to an internal IP address, I'm going to go ahead and generate an alert. You write that Sigma rule, and then you can test it within the Playbook application. Make sure it generates the Elasticsearch query that you need, and then you actually click on Create Play, and that's going to create what we call a detection play inside Playbook. And this play gives you some metadata about what's going on. You can tag the play with MITRE attack information and things like that. But really the three components of the play, which I already mentioned, is number one, context. Why am I doing this? What am I looking for? Number two, the Elasticsearch query that we need for the play. And then third is the next step. So next steps may be, is this a valid RDP listener? Do we have a terminal server on premise? If we don't, who should I be contacting next? What should I be checking to make sure that this is valid or not? Once that is actually in Playbook, then you can make that play active. And that goes out and does some automation. It creates an Elast alert configuration so that we actually will now get alerts for that. It also creates a case template for the Hive. The Hive is a case management application. And so we'll talk about the analyst part of that next, but it creates a case template next. It also updates the application called the Attack Navigator, which gives you a visual indicator of your coverage across the MITRE attack framework. That was kind of a real quick overview, but the idea is that you've got this idea, you got to figure out where the log is, you got to write the Sigma rule for the log, and then create the play from that, and then put it into production. Is that making sense as we go along there?
Yeah, definitely. And that was one of the things I loved, is like all of those automatic actions that happen with that. Palantir has made public like their ADS kind of process. And it's very similar, right? You come up with an idea, you come up with like the core, is it going to work? You test it and all of that. But what you did was take it a step further and say, like, we're going to push out a case template. We're going to turn an actual Sigma rule into a rule that's active in the environment. Yeah. We're going to make it easy to see what you've done with the Attack Navigator. And so that, I think, is where all of this integration becomes really, really nice. As a analyst looking at an alert that has gone off, what is your kind of ideal interaction with this environment? And like, how might that go if they're open up the alert and they're like, okay, I've never seen this before. I'm going to Playbook. Then what?
Sure. Yeah. So from the analyst side, now that, let's say I get an alert generated for this RDP traffic, I pull open the alert. And from right there, I can pivot to Playbook. There's a link. I can pivot to Playbook and I can see context. Okay, this play was written because we want to know when we have an RDP listener publicly accessible. So, okay, I've got context. And that's even without having to read the Elasticsearch query itself. If you've ever had to, I think very normal is that when we're looking at Suricata alerts or something else, because there's just no context typically to what's going on, we have to spend quite a bit of time. If I'm not familiar with the title, I've got to go research the rule. I've got to go try to dig into it and figure out what it's doing, why it's looking at it. And so the point from an analyst perspective is that I should be able to quickly and efficiently pivot to the context, understand what's going on, why I got an alert generated, and then quickly and efficiently pivot to my next steps. Okay, now I know I need to go check this system, go check in with this person, validate it, and then escalate it to a case or, suppress it or, close out that alert. So the idea is I can be able to quickly and efficiently get context on the alert and validate it from there.
Very cool. That's one of the things I'm repeating all the time in class is like, in this triage stage, right, you have a whole mountain of stuff. You need to know what's most important. And when you pick one, you need to see like very clearly, this is something that is clear danger and very high risk, and providing that context. And what I didn't realize is it's linked directly from the alert. So even better, right? It makes it very, very easy to just say, oh, I don't know what this is. One click, you're there. I love that too. That's really, really important, especially maybe the newer you are in InfoSec. It really helps out in that respect, as well as the tribal knowledge problem.
Let me just say, John, in relation to that, when you click over to the play in Playbook, you also get the history of what's happened with the play. If we've made changes, let's say we've tweaked it because we've seen some false positives. We also get commentary from other analysts on there. And so, like you said, if you're new, you can very quickly look at the history of what's going on and figure out, is this something that's outside of the norm, or is this something that's legitimately something I need to take care of? So, yeah, all that tribal knowledge, I think, is more easily self-contained in something like a Playbook.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally forgot about that angle too. Yeah, that's a really important point is, every analytic goes through many, many changes and many people find issues with it. And having a single place to say like, this alert misfired in these situations, have that tagged to a time and a person that made that. And then maybe when you make an edit, have that time stamped and put in there as well. That's a workflow I think works really well with a ticketing solution. And, just by chance, I happened to use ticketing solutions in my past as well for use cases and found the same kind of benefits, which is why I was really stoked to see, that was what you were going with. The other things I wanted to ask about, the Sigma piece. Sigma is one of those things that I think is catching on for sure. I'm starting to hear more and more about it, see more and more support for it. What has been your experience with the Sigma part, and where do you think and do you see that becoming a standard within the industry?
I do. I really like Sigma. So originally when I was working on Playbook from an application perspective, I started growing or using a homegrown solution for describing a play. But I'm a really big believer, if there's something out there that works and works well and has got pretty broad support, and let's just go ahead and use that. Why create yet another quote standard when there's something already out there? And so that's one of the main reasons why I went with Sigma. And certainly there are some edge cases here and there, but from what I've seen and used in production, Sigma works really well. Again, if you're not familiar with Sigma, you write your Sigma rule in YAML, and then you use the Sigma converter, which is a Python script, and you feed that converter your field mappings for your backend system, as well as what you want your back-end system to end up being. In our case, in Security Onion, it's Elasticsearch, but it could be Splunk or something else. And then the Sigma converter will then spit out the query you need for that particular rule. And so The issues I've seen are mainly around not having field mappings set correctly, or things like that, which inside, again, the platform that I'm working with, Security Onion, we do all that for you. You don't have to worry about the Sigma converter or anything. That's all done on the back end for Playbook.
So one of the things I noticed when you create new rules with a Sigma rule and you make them active within Playbook is that it pushes out a new case template into the Hive. And for those that aren't familiar with case templates in the Hive, this is one of those things, I guess there's maybe a little bit of a collision of terms here, but a lot of people would call it a playbook, right? But in terms of the Hive, it's a case template is a series of tasks that are expected to be done, in a given situation. And so you can take this play, as we call it in Playbook, and then tie it directly to a set of steps within the incident management system, which I think is another really awesome thing. How did you make that part work?
Side note here, I actually originally looked at creating a playbook type thing inside the Hive, and I just couldn't get, like you said, the case templates wasn't quite there with what I was looking for. And so that's why I ended up going with an external application. But I really do like the functionality of having your case inside the Hive and having those tasks that you go down. And so the way that we do that in Security Onion and in Playbook is that you add an extra section to your Sigma rule called tasks. And then when we convert that over and we make that play active, there's some backend automation that will just take those tasks and make them part of the case template inside the Hive. And again, the idea here is that when I escalate an alert from the interface in Security Onion, it will create a case inside the Hive, and there will already be preloaded next steps so that the analyst or whoever's working this can see, okay, I need to go, check this out. Let me give you another example of what this may look like. If I have shared drives in my environment, OS query at open source endpoint agent allows us to really get some interesting information about endpoints in the environment. And one of those is shared drives, like Windows shared drives. And in environments that I've worked in, it's really common for temporary shared drives to be made and then forgotten about, backups, or I'm just going to share this information. But specifically backups is what I was thinking of. And so one of the early on plays that I created was anytime there is a new share created in the environment, but it has the term like HR or backups or temp or something as that share name, or it's included in that, go ahead and generate an alert based on that. And then the case template, next steps would be go and confirm, was this a recently created share? What are the share permissions? They should be locked down. Go find out who is the owner of that system, or whether or not this is a legitimate share can be removed. So there's some very specific next steps that we could take in a case like that. And that's where I think the power of adding tasks to your play is really important.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're enjoying this episode, then you're undoubtedly interested in building the strongest security operations team that you can. For those who want to go even deeper, did you know that SANS has not one, but 2 courses that cover security operations centers as well? For the leaders, managers, and directors out there, my co-author Mark Orlando and I offer 551, Building and Leading Security Operations Centers. This course covers building your team, your physical and virtual workspace, getting the right data into your tools, and then focusing on security priorities through everyday execution of important security tasks and building the best SOC team possible. For the technical practitioners out there, my course Sec 450, Blue Team Fundamentals, Security Operations and Analysis is designed to cover everything you need to jump in being the best SOC analyst that you can be. We cover important data types, SOC tools, security logs, malware, analysis technique, automation, and much, much more. In addition, if you want to prove you can deliver the best on any security team, both courses have an accompanying certification available from GIAC. That's the GSOM for 551 and the GSOC for 450. Check out both courses and free demos available on the SANS website. You can get registered today for an in-person course at one of our many events, or go to On Demand and take either class anywhere at your own pace. Thanks for listening. Yeah, definitely. One of the other things I was curious about is, from a manager perspective, having the guidance for analysts and all of that sort of thing is fantastic. But what kind of organization and metrics and reports can Playbook produce for those who are maybe managing the SOC and trying to understand the field of things that are available for detection and the state that they're in and things like that?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So Specifically, right now there's integration with the MITRE Attack Navigator application, which is put out by MITRE, and allows you to, as I mentioned, every time you make a play active, so a detection is active, if that detection is tagged with a particular technique or something like that, then we'll actually get color-coded cells on the application. So from that perspective, a manager should be able to quickly get a view of what kind of coverage they have from a detection perspective. You can also right-click on one of those cells, on one of those techniques, and say view related plays. And you'll be able to it'll bring up Playbook, and it'll show you all of the plays that are tagged with a particular technique or tactic. Outside of that, within the application itself, there is ability to generate some basic metrics, and those would be based on rule sets. So let's say within the Sigma community repository, there are over 500 Sigma rules that you can import and that we import automatically. And those are tagged with like, is this a Windows? Is this Sysmon related? Things like that. And so we can do some metrics around that as well.
Is there any capability right now or any plan to do any capability where you can tie the actual amount of times the alert fired and back to the Playbook interface itself? I'm sure you could probably produce that directly within the other interfaces, but is there like this play has fired this many times? Yeah,
that was something early on that I was looking at, and it's certainly doable. Everything is accessible via APIs. All that data is accessible via API. And so the plumbing is all there. We just got to tie it all together. It is something we're looking at, but it's not something that is currently implemented. But yeah, I would love to be able to pull a report and say this play fired 50 times over the last 3 months, and out of those 47 were false positives, 3 led to incidents, and something or other. And I think that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, keeping my manager hat on for a second here. Now my mind's kind of running wild and like thinking, well, if you could track how many times the thing fired, and you can think about, like when it was acknowledged versus how long it took to go from whatever state to closure, you could get times and all of that sort of stuff. And then all of this would become one really, really nice metrics generating package for management. So it'd be some really cool
lots of possibilities.
Yeah. One of the other things I was wondering, there are a ton of obviously rule sets of all sorts that are out there, whether it's Suricata rules or, anything based on any rule set, right? There's hundreds of rules and analytics that any environment may have at any given time. How do you decide what of those rules become plays in Playbook versus the ones that maybe you just kind of leave as an IDS signature and you don't independently document? That's one of the things I always struggle with trying to figure out how to do.
Sure. When you think about, in particular, network intrusion detection system signatures, they really run the gamut. Some of them are really looking more for atomic indicators, right? Like they're looking for particular IP addresses and things like that. I think those you could possibly disable inside of the NIDS engine and do a play just for atomic indicators in your environment. But there are others that are really specific and maybe looking for C2 communication or some particular malware that communicates via the network. And it really makes more sense just to keep it as let's say a Suricata or snort rule. So I don't think any of those are going away anytime soon. I think it's going to be up to the environment and the team that's looking at it to decide whether or not this should only live in something like a NIDS rule, or it should be pulled into a Playbook play. I definitely think with tuning, you can make your NIDS rules much more manageable. But I was actually looking at one this morning for, it was curl outbound. There were a number of different applications that were setting off. One of them was from Cisco Meraki. It was doing a port 80 HTTP curl outbound. And I mean, I don't care about that. That's not great in my environment, but I don't care about it. So I thought about maybe could we create a play that filters out some of that kind of noise, but brings in some of the other more interesting kind of curl events with a little bit more nuance than I can do with the other tools right now inside NIDS rules. I'm not really sure yet, but my point is that I don't think there's a one size fits all when it comes to that. I think there's always going to be other alerting engines and the alerts that they produce that we're going to have to figure out how that integrates into something like a detection playbook. Is that making sense?
Yep. I think one thing you said kind of reminded me of maybe an approach or, kind of maybe how I've unconsciously done this myself in the past. You said, specific indicators, right? Thinking of the pyramid of pain, right?
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of the Sigma rules are oriented more towards those TTPs and the things that are MITRE ATT&CK, navigator, layer style, some techniques or parent level techniques and things like that. So maybe that's a good way to kind of divide that in between. This is super specific and these are generic kind of processes and procedures you might expect. Is the new navigator stuff supported in there as well? The sub techniques and all that kind of stuff?
Yep. Yeah. So specifically for Sigma, there was some recent changes. So the sub techniques are all supported, and in Playbook itself, that's all supported as well.
Okay. Fantastic. Were there any other unique challenges or things that you kind of had to think really hard about in terms of process or otherwise while you were developing this? What do you think other teams might run into and where can this help them?
From an implementation perspective, so specifically with Playbook and within Security Onion, we import 500 plus Sigma rules from the community repository. One of the things that I think can be a challenge is just like any other rule set is, should I go ahead and just enable all 500, right? And then how do I deal with the deluge of alerts that come through? And that's where I think when you're looking at doing something like Playbook, keep in mind that there's really two ways to approach this. There's the predefined rule sets. There's lots of places that are now producing their own Sigma rules that you could easily import and turn those on. But then there's also more organizational specific Sigma rules or detection plays that you'll write. Those will probably be a little more high fidelity because they're specific for your organization. And so those I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with saying, let's just get all those turned on and make them active and go from there. But be cautious about just enabling, hundreds and hundreds of detection plays without really understanding what you're looking for and why. Keep in mind that Sigma rules really need specific log sources. So in the Sigma repository, you have Zeek log sources, you have Sysmon, Windows event logs, PowerShell, syslog, and a bunch of other types of log sources. So unlike, let's say, a NIDS like Sierra, where you can just enable everything, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you just enable all the rules, it's just one log source, it's your network data, versus the log sources for Sigma are much more disparate. And so you just have to be more cautious and aware of what you're enabling from that perspective. So that would be my thought as you look at moving this into production using something like Playbook.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that. That's actually another conversation I like having with classes is, obviously in the false positive and tuning section of the courses when I'm teaching, one of the things I always bring up is, what's the right or best approach? And I'm not sure that there's a solid answer to this, but I think I know how you might fall in this question, but I wanted to ask it anyway. When you get any sensor, whether it's, the list of default Sigma plays or anything else, is your approach that in general, you start from turn everything off and turn on the things only that you want? Or do you kind of leave the default set on and prefer to work down from the false positives that are generated and just turn those things off?
Honestly, it really depends on the environment and what I'm looking for. I've been in small college environments and I've been in more organizational executive office environments. And I think depending on the environment, I would probably do it a little bit differently, but I would typically start with just enabling the things that I know I want rather than, turn on all the policy violations. I don't want to have to go through all the work of disabling all the rules that alert on, instant messaging and things like that in a college environment because it's not a problem in that kind of environment, right? And so that would be my answer. It's going to depend on the environment and, what you're looking at, but I would typically start with nothing and enable what I'm looking for at that point.
Yeah, that's usually kind of my approach as well. Is I find, at least in my experience, when you leave the default rule set on, analysts will see an alert for the first time. Maybe it's never gone off before. And they're like, well, do we care about this? Or is this just the first time it's gone off? And now, right this moment, we're realizing it's irrelevant and a false positive. And so I think that's kind of a clever approach to kind of getting around that and cleaning things up right from the start, right? In terms of trying out Playbook, what is the easiest way that people can kind of see the application in action? Is there a way to do it kind of outside Security Onion? Do they just drop it into the ISO and put it in eval mode? What's the shortest route to seeing what you've done here?
Sure. So Playbook is an application I was working on previously to Security Onion, and you could certainly still run Playbook with a little bit of work outside of Security Onion, but it's really best used inside Security Onion because that's what it was designed the last year plus of integration with Security Onion. And so best thing to do is go to our, specifically there's free training out there called Security Onion Essentials on YouTube, and that gives step-by-step on downloading the ISO and installing eval mode, and you can get up and running within an hour and check out Playbook from there. So that would be the best way to go at it.
Fantastic. Final question. Any plans for new features going into the future? Where's the roadmap? Do you have anything exciting coming up?
Sure. So there's quite a few things. Some of it's already implemented, it just hasn't been widely pushed yet. One of them is play unit testing, so that when I create a play, you also will put a copy of the log that you're trying to alert off of as part of that creation process. And then anytime the Sigma changes, it's going to run and verify that you still get alerts based off of that log. And if you don't, you'll get errors associated with that. Because again, environments change over time, right? So, or I might make a mistake when I'm editing the Sigma, 6 months from now. And so I want to make sure that I've got a valid detection for the log that I was originally working with. If the log changes, that's fine. You can update that. So unit testing is one of them for detections. Secondly is, this one is coming in the next little bit as well. When we're bringing in the 500 plus Sigma rules from the Sigma repository, some of those need to be tweaked for your environment. And we also keep those updated. So if you're trying to modify a rule for your environment, and then we'll just overwrite those, unfortunately, every night when we do our updates. And so we have some logic in play that we're working with from a contributor that will allow you to, we'll either merge the changes or make it so that we won't overwrite that Sigma rule, to make it a little bit easier to customize it for your environment. And that's one thing that I don't think I really mentioned much, is that with the community repository rules, you need to make sure that you customize these as needed. Like the remote desktop protocol detection I mentioned earlier, if you've got a terminal server publicly accessible, please don't ever do that. But if you do, you're going to need to specify in your Sigma rule, this is legit to see RDP traffic to this IP address. Anything other than that, though, should be a problem. So those are the two main features. There's certainly some other automation things that I won't get into now, but we're really on the ground floor of Playbook, and I'm looking forward to continue developing it in the near future.
Very cool. Love the unit testing thing. I didn't even think about that one yet in asking. So yeah, glad you brought that up. That's a really important thing, right? Yeah, it works when it started versus it works 3 years later. It's two very different questions.
Exactly. Yep.
Where can we follow projects you're doing, Security Onion? Where's the best place to keep up to date with this online?
So my Twitter account at Defensive Depth. I also have a blog, defensivedepth.com. Those are really the two best places to keep up with a lot of the work that I'm involved in, specifically with Playbook, OS Query, or Security Onion in general.
Well, I think that wraps it up for today. Thank you, Josh, for being on the podcast. Blue Teams of the World certainly appreciate what you've produced here. Really, really nice, well thought out integration of all these tools, with metadata and the case templates and Attack Navigator and metrics and unit testing. Really excited to see where this goes in the future. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you much. Really enjoyed it.
Hey, Blue Teamers. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Blueprint. If you've got a second and want to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It would be really, really meaningful to us. And if you have any ideas or suggestions, I would love to hear them. Your reviews are going to be one of the best ways to help others find this podcast, so anything you could do would be a big help. As always, thank you for listening. You can connect to me on social at SecHub, SECHUBB on Twitter, or on LinkedIn. So until next time, thank you for listening to the Blueprint Podcast.